Supporting me in this webinar, I have Abhishek. Abhishek is a senior subject matter expert at e-GMAT, and he's going to be a co-host. Also, we have Lisha, who's the senior strategy expert, and she's also going to be a co-host in this session. Uh, our goal today is to discuss critical skills that you need to build, that you need to excel on if you want to get to that 90th percentile, 95th percentile, or 99th percentile in GMAT Sentence Correction. We will discuss about 3 examples during this webinar through which we'll explain the importance of those skills. And then for e-GMAT students, we'll explain how the e-GMAT course builds those skills and what metrics do you need to hit during each stage of learning to ensure that your journey to that 90th, 95th percentile in sentence correction is smooth and actually the fastest. But before we do that, I want to kind of understand you guys a bit better. Let me move forward. And actually, before we go, I want to talk about some other free webinars that we have. We have a free webinar on GMAT Algebra, more specifically inequalities and absolute value. That's tomorrow, exactly 24 hours from now. If not registered for this webinar, you can register for that by clicking on the register now button over here. Actually, just give me 1 second. By clicking on the register now button over here, then next week, next Saturday, exactly a week from now, we have a strategy webinar. In this webinar, we discuss the principles of building your own study plan. We talk about how and why a personalized study plan is important, and then how can you build one regardless of your starting score and your target score. That's next week, 7 a.m. Pacific time, or exactly at the same time a week from now. All right, with that, let's kind of get to know you guys a bit better. I'm going to ask you a few questions, a few on this screen, a few on another screen. I want to understand when do you guys plan to take the GMAT? And then let's get one other question. That is, what is your target GMAT score? Let's get answers to this question. All right, we see answers pouring in. So when do people plan to take the test? You can really see it's a fairly consistent sequence across the 4 options that are there. And then we have the biggest segment over here is those who haven't taken a date as of yet. And then with regards to the target GMAT score, a fairly high number in that 730 to 760 bracket. A lot of folks in the 710, 720, some in the other 3 brackets that are out here. With that, let me go right into the webinar pane. And as we go into the webinar pane, the screen will have changed for you. What you should see over here is first of all a presentation which says to help you improve to 90th percentile ability, and then below that is a Q&A or a question and answer part. Just as logistics for this session, the pane below the presentation pane is the pane where you post your questions. Now, I will, throughout this session, I'll have a lot of questions from my side towards you. For example, here's one yes, no question. If you're an e-GMAT student, if you're a paid student, select yes. If you're not a paid student, select no. And so the pane on the right-hand side is for my questions. And your answers, the pane below the presentation is for your questions, and we will respond to those questions. So during the session, if you have a question, post that question in the Q&A part, and that way Abhishek and or Lisha and or I can get to it, and that way we'll ensure that your questions are answered while we go through with the webinar. Now, this webinar is going to last about 2 hours from this time on, and then by following this these logistics, we'll be able to ensure that we end the webinar in a couple of hours so that you guys can learn what you need to learn and apply that post that. Okay, again, as I said, the goal of the webinar is to make sure that each one of you has a clear path to achieving that 90th percentile. Of course, you won't achieve that 90th percentile within this webinar, but you'll know the skills that are required to get there. All right. Now, what does it take to achieve that 90th percentile? I think the answer to that is fairly simple. You've got to make sure that you answer questions with high accuracy or achieve high accuracy on the test, and then you've got to make sure that you do that within a certain time span. That's something that we need to achieve. Now, while the answer seems trivial, the path to get to it is something that's a bit more involved, and which is what we'll discuss as we go through this entire process. Just give me 1 second. Let me reset the pane in the admin side so that we are all on the same screen. Now, we're going to discuss the meaning-based approach in GMAT Sentence Correction. And this approach was invented by my co-founder, Payal Tandon, who's GMAT Club's #1 instructor. As you guys get the presentation, if you click on the Know More part, you'll be able to see the ranking of instructors. And GMAT Club has about 200 instructors, which have ranked from 1 to, of course, 200. Payal invented the meaning-based approach in 2010. And we right now, in the third iteration of that approach, which is what you're going to learn today. And because of this approach, this is one of the key factors that powers the success that e-GMAT delivers. And since 2021, we've delivered 3 out of 5 700 scores that have been reported on GMAT Club. And just to kind of make you visualize that. So if you look at GMAT Club, if you look at data since 2021, so since January of 2021, what you're going to find is that 60% of all 700 plus scores reported belong to e-GMAT. The remaining 40% belong to the other 8 partners on GMAT Club. Okay. And this wasn't always the case. This is a lot of this is because of the iterations that we've done on our platform. For example, when we started, so in the first 2 to 3 years of our existence, we accounted for fewer than 20% of all 700 plus scores. Then that number gradually increased to about 30-odd%. And since 2020, so 2021 and beyond that, since we launched the third generation, that's when we've been delivering 60% of, we've been accounting for 60% of those 700 plus scores or so. So with that, let's kind of get to know each other a bit better. I'm going to put in a short answer part over here. I want to kind of understand what is it that, where are you from? Let me just put in a short answer pod. Just give me 1 second. As a short answer pod question, you can put, just hold on, give me 1 second. Here is the pod. You can put your answers in here, and I have lots of folks from India, Ghana. I have a few folks from Canada as well as in the Q&A pod, UK, Nigeria, really good to see that, Spain, Chicago. Well, you guys are still facing the winter. Lebanon, that's good. Thank you for joining us from Lebanon. Philly. All right, so lots of folks from India, lots of folks from the US, a few folks from the UK, and then a few folks from other parts of Europe, as well as from some parts of Africa as well. Well, thank you very much for joining. And for those of you who are from India, thank you especially for joining, at 8:30 p.m. your time on a Saturday evening. I know it can be really painful to study. I'm right now visiting India at this point, and at 30 p.m. on a Saturday is clearly a lot of pain to join. So France as well. Well, that's good to know. So with that, I'm going to put in some questions over here. Let's talk about your SC ability overall. So I'm going to put in poll questions with 5 choices. You can really select what your current SC ability is, and the options over here are below 30th percentile, between 31st and 50th, 51st to 75th, and above 75th percentile. All right, let's get a few more responses here. And then if you don't know your SC ability, then you can really say that I don't know what you're talking about. All right, so the biggest group over here is who's in between that 51st or 75th percentile. We're going to really talk about why is it that people get stuck in that group and how can you move forward. So this session is probably the perfect session for you. For those of you who are below 50th percentile, so below 30th or below 50th, we're going to really look at what challenges you have to overcome to get to that 75th or 90th percentile overall. And for those of you who don't know what your ability is, you can measure your ability by taking a sigma x mock. This is where you can see this is the output of a sigma x mock. It gives you your ability scores on quant and verbal. So it gives you 5 ability scores 3 in verbal, 2 in quant, and then you can use those ability scores to essentially build your study plan. The second link over here is the link to the SigmaX mock, which you can see that over here. Now, this question only has 3 choices. I want you to tell me, what do you think is the most important skill when it comes to acing GMAT sentence correction? Just focus on choices A, B, or C. Do not go towards D or E. What's the most important skill when it comes to acing GMAT sentence correction? And why is it that most people remain stuck at 60th percentile? Okay, 3. I have about 46 responses. Let's get to about 50, about 86 people in the webinar. 49. All right, I have about 50 responses. Let me end the poll, broadcast the results, and you can see 75% of you say it's understanding the intended meaning, about 16% mapping the sentence structures, and only 12% of you say know the grammar rules. That's really good. I really like you guys as a group, because this is exactly the right approach when it comes to acing 700 level questions. Understanding the meaning is first, and mapping the sentence structure is critical skill. That's something which is there, and in my opinion, or in our opinion, the least important one is knowing the grammar rules. Overall, again, it's not that it's not important, it's just in the order of priority, it is the least important. All right, okay, this is another interesting one. I want you to tell me, when it comes to solving SC questions, how much time should you be spending to analyze the original choice that's given to you? Should it be less than 20%, between 21 and 40, between 40 and 50, 50 and 70? We remove broadcast results. It's the critical piece here, because it's one thing to really say, hey, intended meaning is really important. It's another thing to really put that in practice. And when you put that in practice, you achieve a certain time distribution as to where you spend your time. And this is what tells me how you think you should be spending your time, or where you think you should be spending your time. And then we can, that's kind of a diagnosis as to what should be fixed overall. It kind of tells you a symptom, or tells me a symptom that needs to be fixed. All right, let me end the poll, broadcast the results. So 3 close groups. So 21 to 40%, that's about 26% of you. 40 to 50, 50 to 70, that's another 2 relatively popular groups over here. For me, it's either this or this. So typically between 40 and 55% is what I would really put it over here. And personally, when I solve questions, about 40 to 45% of my time spent on analyzing choice A, and some challenging questions that even goes to about 50-55% or so. Definitely, it's not this part. This, in my opinion, based on the data that I've seen, or based on our students, this is something folks who spend 20 to 40% of their time typically do not achieve the high ability that they're looking for. And we're going to really see why. And then I think last couple of questions, this one I want to kind of understand, what resources are you using to excel GMAT sentence correction? Let's get that over here. I'm going to remove broadcast results. So using the e-GMAT SC course, you should select that. If you're using the Manhattan GMAT SC book, then you should really do that. If you're practicing questions, if you're using the GMAT Club Grammar book or another prep course, you should mention that as well. Let's get a few more responses. I have about 35, 36, 40. 43. Again, let's see if we can get to 50 overall. So the question is, which resources are you using to excel on GMAT sentence correction? All right, I have 50 responses. Let me end the poll. 46% of you are using the e-GMAT SC course. Then the next most popular one is practicing questions from either the official guide or GMAT Club. A few of you are using the Manhattan GMAT book, and then a few of you are also using another prep course. All right. Okay. So again, what will you gain from this webinar? If you're an e-GMAT student, we'll talk about how should you use the e-GMAT course to get to that 90th percentile in the shortest possible time with the fewest iterations. Both these go hand in hand. So if you follow the right approach, you get there faster. It may seem slow in the beginning, but you'll get there faster and you'll have fewest iterations, the least amount of frustration. Because let me just say this, getting to 90th percentile, regardless of how you think about it, is not going to be smooth sailing for most people. Why? Because if it were smooth sailing, it would not be 90th percentile or 95th percentile to begin with. But again, if you follow if you follow those winning behaviors, you will get there. You'll get there with the fewest iterations or so. If you're someone who's not a paid student, we're going to talk about what are the skills that you should build. What's that what we call as the core skill focused approach when it comes to acing GMAT sentence correction versus what most people kind of follow, which is the rule focused or the grammar focused approach that people follow as well. Okay. I'm going to talk about this later on. So let us get started. This is going to be baptism by fire. So we're going to solve some questions. We're going to look at our learnings from those, and then we're going to apply those learnings into the next question. Okay. So some housekeeping tips overall. We have fun when we keep the session interactive. So the more you participate, the more you learn. Some people have this fear of making a mistake. This is what I call as a very low risk environment. You make a mistake, you figure out why you made a mistake, you give yourself that feedback and you reduce your chances of making that mistake. If you're here in this session, participate, because that's the best use of your time. You're already spending the time, so participate and participate in a constructive fashion. Okay. uh, and make sure you try and answer all the questions. And if you don't know the answer and you should still answer, say I'm not certain, but I think this is what it is. Okay. And if you have questions, try it and put those questions in the Q&A pod. And yes, this session is being recorded, so we will share the recording with you as well. Okay. um, the other thing which we'll try and solve questions in an untimed manner. I want to give you the luxury of time so that you focus on applying the process. That way we isolate the skills that you lack in an untimed environment. We take that one variable out of the equation. Okay. um, so what we're going to do is, and let me just bring that poll over here. I'm going to bring in that poll and hold on. Bring in the next poll over here. Just give me 1 second. Reopen this poll, and I want you guys to select this choice which says still solving. That way 30 of you, I want 30 of you to select the still solving. That way when you choose a choice other than still solving, I know most of you are done, and I'm going to call time that way. Let me remove broadcast results. So let's use this. I'm going to give you the first question. This is the first question. Go slowly, go deliberately, apply the process, and tell me what you think is the correct answer. Good luck, guys. I'm going to mute myself for the duration of the time that you're taking to solve this question. All right, about 75% of the class is done. In the last 20 seconds, get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. Let me broadcast the results. First of all, I want to congratulate you guys for the phenomenal participation. I have about 97 students in the webinar, and I think about 80 plus responses here. That's phenomenal. The second thing that you really see is that, you know, the three choices that are really popular, choice E for elephant is the most popular, choice B is the next most popular choice, as well as and choice C is the third most popular choice. So if you people chose choices A or D, that is very interesting for me. Usually we have a lot more candidates for choice D, but that's really, really interesting. So let's kind of go ahead and solve this question. Okay, so let's kind of look at this, and I'm going to just focus on choice here, because remember we had this poll question: how much time do you spend on choice? And the first question I'm going to ask is there a comparison? Let me bring my short answer part over here so that you guys can participate. Is there a comparison here? Yes. Yes, there is a comparison. You can really see. We're talking about two factors that impact the slackening of growth in productivity. The first factor is government regulation. The second factor is the coming to the end. Let me just see, of a period of rapid growth. So this is number one, and this is number two over here. And what the author is trying to communicate is that two has a much bigger impact than one. Did everyone get that? Just by reading this, so there's a comparison. What the author is trying to really say is two has a much greater impact than one. Okay. All right. Now, when we look at this over here, the first thing that we really see is, okay, there's a comparison. Comparison means that we should have a parallel structure. And here we have less by government regulation, and here the by is missing. Because by is missing, choices A and B, we should reject choices A and B. Is that clear to folks who chose choice B? Because many of you chose choice B. Folks who chose choice B, is that clear? If that's not clear, you can pose that question in the Q&A pod. All right. So with that, choices A and B are done. Let's kind of focus on the meaning part a bit more over here, and we're going to focus on. Okay. First of all, if you visualize what the author is trying to achieve, and then you apply your grammar knowledge, that is the deterministic grammar knowledge, you're going to reduce that back and forth. You're going to be much more certain of of how to approach this question. Again, when you do that, you save time. All right. So let's visualize the meaning of this weird looking expression coming to an end. And to do that, and this is something which you're going to this is one word that you're gonna see again and again. The word visualize. Why? Because when it comes to acing GMAT verbal, you've got to build that skill of that visualization ability. Okay, so this is the same choice over here. The overall slackening of growth and productivity is influenced less by government regulation than by, we don't have a by over here, by the coming to an end of a period of rapid growth in agricultural productivity. So let's kind of look at this chart, and we really just say, hey, let's define that rapid growth is any growth rate that's greater than 5%. So we're drawing over time, and time could be in years, in months, or whatever it is, that this growth rate is at that very high level. Okay. And then it starts to go down, which is where it's going down over here. So when you look at this coming to the end of a period of rapid growth of agriculture productivity, what the author is really saying is that when we are in this between points B and C, that's when the growth in agricultural productivity is between point B and C, that's what impacts the overall growth and productivity, or a slackening of growth and productivity. That's what the author is trying to communicate. Is that something that's clear? Coming to the end, coming to an end of a period of rapid growth in agricultural productivity. By 5% is a threshold for rapid growth. Okay, and we're talking about that period B and C. Okay, over here. So now I want you to tell me, I want you to reattempt this piece and tell me what do you think would be the answer for this particular question. We've already rejected choices A and B, so don't put choices A and B. I want you to tell me what do you think should be the answer. Three, two, and one. We end the poll, broadcast the results. Now we've shifted our focus to choices C and E, and there are a few more folks who are looking at choice D. Now, I want to ask you, is by coming to the end or by the end, do they communicate the same meaning? Does this and this communicate the same meaning? No, they don't. Let's kind of go back to our chart here. Okay. So coming to the end, let's go back. Coming to the end signified this period over here between B and C. What does the word by the end of period of rapid growth? Which point does by the end signify? C. This is exactly the C. By the end of a period of rapid growth in agricultural productivity. It is around that C point. Why? Because this is where the rapid growth is ending. Okay. Now, if you wanted to communicate the period between B and C, and you actually use the word by the end, do you think you've communicated the meaning that the author intended to communicate? No. Then why is it that so many of you chose choice E? What made choice E more attractive for you? Because about half of you chose choice E. It seemed right. Okay. How many of you agree that it seemed right? It seemed elegant. Sentence formation. It was short and clear. Remember, I asked this question, what is the most important skill when it comes to acing GMAT sentence correction? What is your answer to that? Meaning. Where does seemed right come in meaning? If this is what the author intended, then how can this seem right? Okay, this is an official question. And I'm going to show 3 to 4 official questions where if you do not focus on choice, if you do not visualize the meaning that the author wants to communicate through choice A, you're going to make these mistakes. How many of you did a back and forth between choices C, D, and E, and you said, oh, C seems correct, D also seems correct, E actually seems the best because it's most elegantly worded? How many of you did that? Just say why, if you did do that. Had you visualized the intended meaning, would you have done that back and forth? No, you wouldn't have. You would have really just said, this is what the author wants to communicate. And this is and choice C is the only choice that communicates that. What's confusing? The elegance or the meaning? When you say it's so confusing, what is confusing here? The elegance or the meaning? No. The elegance is not confusing. If you go by elegance, by the end is the correct is actually very elegant. It just sounds right, absolutely. But then it doesn't communicate the meaning. Now, what's the GMAT an exam of? Grammar or logic? Logic, right? What do you do post the GMAT? You go for your MBA or an MIM. You go for a master's program. Now let's kind of go back to this part over here. If let's say you're a stock analyst, right? And if you intended to communicate that this is the period that we should buy a stock, and you actually ended up communicating this part, what's going to happen to your recommendation? If you intended to communicate the period between B and C, and if it's going to lead to a loss. Depending on the extent of investment, you might get fired. Are MBAs supposed to be grammarians, or are MBAs supposed to be precise communicators? How many of you think Satya Nadella, Sundar Pichai, Larry Page, uh, Shantanu Narayan are grammarians? Versus how many of you think they actually communicate to their employees and to their customers precisely what they want to communicate? They're communicators. Okay. And that's what you need to be. There's a reason why GMAT sentence correction exists. It's not to make sure that you're a grammarian. It's to make sure that you know when you write a piece of text, what is it that you're communicating. Let's kind of look at choices D and E. We already talked about choice E. Let's look at choice D over here. Okay, I'm gonna put in a notes pane over here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a sentence with the word ending. Right? Let me just go back here. So give the bold piece. What does by ending mean in this case? By ending, doesn't it lead to an action that Steve mentioned did? Right? By stopping, right? He did an action and that action caused something. Termination. He terminated, he stopped something. It's an action word. Now, in choice A, do we have an action? No, it's not. And this is, how many of you visualize choice D in this manner? Let me ask this question. How many of you visualize choice D when you read choice D in this particular manner? That ending means an action, not a time period. If you did not, then your takeaway from this is, even though you may have rejected it, but your takeaway from this is a muscle that you need to build. Similarly, by the end of, if you did not visualize what that choice meant, then your takeaway should be, this is something that I need to build. Why? Because GMAT sentence correction tests you on this. I see that comment. Didn't a complete bundle of thing that by ending is less wordy than version by coming to? Um, can you please clarify the question? I'd be happy to address that. Okay. A is in parallel, yes, but A communicates a good meaning. That's what you need to get from choice A. Okay. If you're able to visualize the intended meaning, then you're going to be able to achieve two things. One is you're going to answer questions with high accuracy. Why? Because you'll reject answer choices, the seemingly close but incorrect answer choices quickly, um, with high confidence. And because you're able to figure out what the author intends to communicate, you're going to be able to do this quickly. Okay. Now I'm going to elaborate a bit more on that skill to visualize information. Okay. um, Over here. By ending was a less wordy version of by the coming to an end. But do you now see the difference between by ending versus by coming to an end? Absolutely. So that's your takeaway. How are you going to see and see that's good part. When I say participate, that's and you're going to learn from this. How are you going to ensure that you don't make that mistake again, or you learn from every question that you solve? How are you going to ensure that? How are you going to ensure that? One of the things that was very simple for you to do, the correct answer is choice C. It's neither D nor E. Was that not clear, by the way? The correct answer was choice C. Perfect. Now, so the first takeaway that I want you to have is that that each one of you who is here, if you want to get to that 90 and 95th percentile, needs to build that visualization muscle. And if you want to build it faster, if you want to get to that faster, it's not just when you're studying for the GMAT, it's when you're doing anything, because it does require deliberate effort. And just I want to give you a bit of a segue to really talk about the visualization muscle. So this is, this text that you see over here is from Black Beauty, which is a classic by Anna Sewell. So it's not something that's super complex or so. But again, if you truly want to read that well, then you need to visualize this. So I'm going to elaborate on this part over here. You can read this over here. Just take a moment to read this, and I want you to read and visualize this. Not going to ask a question on this, but I'm going to tell you how I read this. So take about 30-35 seconds to read this. All right. So when I read this in my way, I kind of visualize an iron gate. Then I open that iron gate and then visualize a smooth road. I see huge trees on either side of the road. I visualize them. I'm still visualizing tall trees. I could visualize palm trees. I could visualize some other trees, but they're tall trees on both sides of the road. Then a house appears. Okay. And the house has gardens along with it. Then beyond that garden, there's a small field, um, and with a fence with an apple orchard. So you should visualize apple trees, and then you should visualize some stables with horses near the orchard. How many of you, when you read a piece of text, do this kind of visualization? Good. Sometimes, if you want to improve in sentence correction faster, build that habit to visualize this. Again, this was Black Beauty, but I want you to visualize the same piece of information when you read The Economist, when you read New York Times, when you read the Wall Street Journal. Really, really important. And the more you do, the faster you would improve. As you're going through the e-GMAT SC course, you're going to really see we try and build that this visualization muscle as well. Here's an example. This is a screenshot from the e-GMAT course. When you go through the course, all of this is animated, so only one piece of information comes at a time. But this is, the end of the animation where you say arranging exotic flowers in a symmetric fashion. Mary built a beautiful bouquet. You can see this is the output. This is Mary, and it describes how Mary built that bouquet. And it's that ability to visualize. That's what we're trying to build during the course. And when you go through the course, don't rush through it. Look at the pictures. There's a reason why this has been built in here. Here's an example where if you visualize, you'd be able to kind of see a logical modification. So, kept on the topmost shelf of rack 11, Keats wrote these books. Keats wasn't kept on the topmost shelf. That's illogical. The books were kept, which is where the passive voice is the correct version, where you say kept on the topmost shelf of rack 11. These books were written by Keats. Again, passive voice on the GMAT is perfectly acceptable as long as it communicates the intended meaning and a logical meaning. Okay. But again, build that visualization muscle. And as you go through the course, don't just rush through it. Look at why the visuals are put in there and compare how your brain visualized it to the visuals in the course. The more you do that, the faster you will improve. Okay, and it's not just limited to very simple examples. We take complex examples as well. Again, the goal really is to start with simple examples and then build that visualization ability so that, yeah, you're able to enhance that ability and apply it on questions. Okay. Again, the goal really is to make sure that we improve your accuracy and improve your timing. We first start with improving your accuracy, and then as we do that, your timing fixes itself. Okay. One of the other pieces that's there is when you visualize meaning, you're going to see your ability to reject close answer choices. And I'm going to demonstrate this with a couple of more examples, increases. And you're much more confident in the answer choice that you put in. Now, why is this important? Why? Because if you're aiming for a V40 or a higher score, which I'm sure many of you are, given the GMAT score that you're aiming for, you want to make sure that your brain's fresh. You want to make sure that you don't think about the prior question, which means that you should be confident in how you're answering questions. And also you want to keep your brain fresh, which is why you want to reduce that back and forth. How many of you do that back and forth a lot today? Where you solve a question, you're confused between answer choices, you go back to the original prompt and kind of verify which answer choice is correct. Again, focus on visualizing the original choice. You'd see that back and forth goes down tremendously. Okay. Here's a guy who started with a very high ability. Many of you are in that between that 50th to 75th percentile ability. This guy started with a very, very high ability, and he said if you don't have the meaning correct, then it's like hammering your head against a wall. It might work for a weak structure such as the 600 level question, where you instinctively know the right answer, but it will not work for a 700 level question. This guy went from a 680 to a 760, got a V47 on 99 percentile on GMAT verbal. Okay, and which is why we've delivered this kind of success overall. Now, this wasn't always the case. Let me just say this. So, building the third generation of sentence correction, meaning-based approach is one thing, but along with this, there's a lot of stuff that goes along with this that helped us deliver the success. And all of this has this personalization built into it, starting with your study plans. For those of you who are e-GMAT students, how many of you have built your own personalized study plan and have your own custom time estimates? How many of you have done that? Most of you should have, but 80-85% of our students, I know, do that, a personalized study plan. Okay. Then when you start studying, you get feedback with every learning activity. You get feedback with every cementing quiz. This feedback is again personalized to you. How many of you have written to our support team? Okay. The feedback that you get is personalized. In fact, many of you, if you've written, you would have gotten um, also a video support where one of our strategy experts records a video for you to really say, hey, this is where you're going wrong. This is what you need to do next. These are the metrics that you need to hit. And as you go in Scholaranium, you're going to see analytics, which isolate where you're faltering, why you're faltering, what metrics are you not hitting, so that you have a clear idea of what you need to improve. There's a reason why most people get stuck at 660. They actually don't know what to do next. With through analytics, through the support, we push people from that 666.7 to that 727.30, because once people know where they need to improve, precisely, I'm going to demonstrate that with a few case studies. They they actually can focus on that, on improving them, because improving those areas. Why? Because the acing the GMAT's not rocket science. It's about following a precise plan and executing on it. Okay. And because of this personalization, if you look at data from accounting for about 20% of all 700 plus scores, when we had 11 partners over here in 2019, we now have improved that share overall. And the reason why you see the size of that circle increase is because the total number of scores, 700 plus scores reported on GMAT Club, also increased between 2019 and 2021. And despite that, we were able to improve that lead. Okay. Now, for those of you who are not e-GMATers, if you want to build your personalized study plan, you can schedule a call with one of the strategy experts from Lisha's team. Um, the first link over here, I think, gets you to building that personalized study plan. Okay. Again, when you build that personalized study plan, you take a Sigma X mark. You actually get links to you get your target abilities, and when you get your target abilities, you know how much time commitment you need, you know what you're trying to hit overall. Here's an example of another student who hit a V47. That's this guy said that he improved his SC ability from a 69 percentile to a 99 percentile. You can click on this link to watch his debrief. Again, um, people who started high ability, if you think your ability is good because you're naturally good in English, you might be able to improve from that 60th, 70th percentile to 80th. But if you're not following the meaning based approach, you will get stuck. You will hit a plateau. This is what Aditya did. He says the biggest difference that helped me conquer the 99 percentile was following the meaning based approach. And he said, I'm absolutely no one to argue. For everyone having their own style. But believe me, the process of breaking down a long sentence into clauses, phrases, and modifiers, understanding the author's intended meaning before applying the rules of grammar would help you, could be the difference between you getting many and most SC questions right. Again, follow the process. You're going to see the improvement right away. With that, let's go and solve another SC question. All right. We're going to follow the same process. Question 2. This is another difficult question. Let me bring this out here, reopen the poll. And I want you to click on still solving. Let's get 30 people to click on still solving. All right, good. Let me remove broadcast results. And here is the question. Good luck, guys. All right, almost 80% of the class is done. Let's get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. We end the poll. I'm going to broadcast the results, and you guys did reasonably well over here. I would say choice B is really popular, choice D is quite popular. So those are the two, I'd say, more popular choices. Together, they account for about 77% of all the votes. Then C and E are equally popular, about 11%. Practically no one chose choice A. Okay. It's good. Let's come back here. How many of you, when you saw this and said, "Man, this is such a long sentence," and just hated it when you saw this? Okay. Long sentences are an opportunity. Long sentences, complex and sentence structures are an opportunity for you to learn sentence structure, especially in an environment such as this one, where you don't have a timing constraint. Okay, so let's kind of visualize this sentence using the sentence structure approach. Okay, although appearing less appetizing than most of their round and red supermarket cousins, heirloom tomatoes. So what appears less appetizing? Heirloom tomatoes, grown from seeds saved during the previous year. They're often green and striped or have plenty of bumps and bruises. Heirlooms are more flavorful and thus in increasing demand. Okay, so let's kind of ask certain questions so that we understand the meaning over here. What kind of tomatoes are less appetizing? What kind of tomatoes are less appetizing? Heirloom, right? What are green and striped and have bumps and bruises? What does this imply? What does this imply? What's the author's intention? Its features, yes, but more it's its appearance, or what the author is trying to imply it is that heirloom is not attractive, right? They're not as appealing. Okay. What are green and striped or have bumps and bruises? Heirloom again. This part is clear. Which ones are more flavorful? What kind of tomatoes are more flavorful? HT again, right? And what is the contrast? Now this one's critical. What is the contrast here? What is the contrast here? Yes. The contrast is what says they look ugly, but they taste good. It says even though they don't look as good as others, they taste great. And and this contrast, expressing this contrast, is a key objective that the author wants to achieve from this sentence. And that's why the author has used this word, although. How many of you missed that? So the author, in addition to expressing all of this stuff here, the author also wants to express this contrast, and that's why the author has used this word. People who missed that, which choice did you choose? Yes, D. People who missed that chose choice D, because choice D fixes a critical error but makes this additional error. That's the only key difference between B and D. Now, had you focused on the meaning part, would you have would you have been confused between choices B and D? No. Spending those extra few seconds, you guys knew the grammar. You just didn't focus on what is it that the author wants to communicate. Because that's why you got to choices B and D. Yes, absolutely. B is the answer. We'll see every choice. Yes, absolutely. Okay. So what's wrong? We'll look at every answer choice. So don't worry about that. And that's something that's true for every GMAT session. We analyze every answer choice to death. Why? Because that's how you guys make sure that you reject answer choices confidently. What's the problem here? Although appearing less appetizing than most of the round and red supermarket cousins, heirloom tomatoes, what? Nothing. Okay. There's a subject verb here, there's a subject verb here. This guy over here has a missing verb. Can most people see this? Heirloom tomatoes. For this HT, there is no verb, right? Something which is absolutely wrong here. Okay. The key piece when it comes to analyzing errors is to focus on analyzing all deterministic errors. So, subject verb errors, deterministic verb tenses, deterministic modifiers, comparisons. We saw that in question number one. Focus primarily on deterministic errors. As long as you first do that, then do this, you're going to have a much higher hit rate. Okay. Again, the comparison, heirloom versus those nicer tomatoes. Okay. The nicer tomatoes, they look better. Heirloom doesn't look as good. They're less flavorful. Heirloom is more flavorful. These guys, the regular tomatoes, are less in demand. Heirloom are more in demand. When I solved this question for the first time, I kind of was curious as to what heirloom tomatoes are, and I went to the supermarket and actually bought tomatoes. These heirloom tomatoes truly are delicious. If you get a chance to go buy them, they're expensive, but they're worth the money, especially if you put them in sandwiches. I think you get everything in India. I'm gonna go down tomorrow and see if we can get heirloom tomatoes. But I've been surprised with regards to what we get over here. Okay, let's look at choice A. Choice A had the error where there's no verb, missing verb. I'm going to say MV, missing verb over here. Choice B is my correct answer. Let's look at choice D. I think we have choice D in detail. But first, let's look at choice C. Some of you did choose choice C. The only difference between choice A and choice C is although appearing and although they appear. People who chose choice C over choice A, the reason they did that is because they felt, hey, this is a better expression. Am I correct? Very few people did that, but those who, and again, could you explain why they appear is better than appearing? And for those of you who chose choice C and rejected choice A, they weren't able to identify the missing verb. Why? Because choice C has a missing verb as well. Yes, choice C is wrong. Why? Because it has the same missing verb. There's really no difference between appearing and they appear. Both of them communicate the meaning perfectly well. There's no deterministic error between choices A and C. There's no deterministic difference between choices A and C. Both of them have missing verb. Okay. So, which is why both of these choices are wrong, and which is something that you do, you'd be able to figure out if you focus on building that sentence structure. Let's look at choice D. This is choice A over here. This is choice D. Grown from seeds saved during the previous year, HT appear less appetizing. So you have the verb here, for HT than most of the round and red supermarket cousins. But there's no although. The contrast is completely lost over here. Okay, and had you visualized the original choice, you would have said the contrast aspect is the contrast is a key aspect of meaning. I need to keep that aspect. Okay. Choice E. Some of you did choose choice E. Choice. Yes. If the author wants to communicate the contrast, you've got to communicate the contrast. B versus C is not clear. I've not discussed. Why is choice B versus C? I think Abhishek, you have that, so I'm going to give that to you in the Q&A part. Choice E. What's the error in choice E? What's the error in choice E? Verb. What about verb? There is no verb. It's the same error that you have in choice A. So for those of you who were able to build sentence structure in choice A, were also able to reject choice E confidently. Heirloom tomatoes or HT grown from blah 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 blah, although they appear less appetizing, they are often. Where is the verb for this HT? There is no verb for this HT. They appear as a subject verb pair. They are as a subject verb pair. Heirlooms are as a subject verb pair. But what about the verb for this guy? Okay. Here is the sentence structure for choice D. You can see choice E, I'm sorry, E for elephant. You can see there's no subverb for heirloom tomatoes. The same error that choice A had, which is why E is wrong. Okay. Yes, grown could be written in a verb form. It's not written in a verb form, which is where there is no error. There's no verb for HT over here. All right. So we saw two different questions, two different sentences. Both of them use the skill of visualization. The additional skill, the additional skill of creating sentence structure, that skill is something that we learned in choice B over here. Why? And why is that skill important? Because when sentences are long, you want to make sure that you're able to map elements to the respective actors, and sentence structure is a tool that allows you to do that. Let's look at this. The phrase of apposition, and this is something, if you put it over here, Abhishek will actually tell you a lot about this. Um, should be placed next to HT. Um, do you think most CEOs would be able to answer to address your doubt over here? The phrase of opposition, they're often green bruises. Do you think most CEOs would be able to answer this question? No. Again, you'll see a lot of those grammatical errors, which grammarians have done and have categorizes, um, and those on the GMAT are not relevant. Those terms seem very exotic, but on the GMAT, as long as the meaning that you're communicating is clear, is non-ambiguous, life is good. If you want to see, let's kind of go back over here. I'm going to One of the problems that happens when people kind of see grammatical terms over here, they have the fear of missing out. How many of you kind of face this challenge? FOMO. You see a grammatical term, you say, I've got to learn. Maybe this is a rule that's going to be critical to my uh, to my ability to getting to that 90th percentile. A lot of people have that. Why? Because of two things. One is the term seems exotic. The second is rules are fairly easy to learn. You learn them, you think, you have those, you'd be able to apply this and answer the questions correctly. All of us love to have tricks. Okay. Avoid jargon. That I think is Abhishek typing. That's really important. And the reason I want to really talk about this is a question from GMAT Club. You can see that's 65% hard, 12,000 sessions. This question has 4 pages of discussion. Each page is about 30 posts over here. I want to just kind of look at some of those discussions over here. How do you tackle the use of dash in a sentence? That's okay, a logical question. But then look at this. Can we say choice E is wrong because of 2 consecutive modifiers? And they can't modify one thing which is a noun. The person who's asking this, did this person focus on the missing verb error? We said choice E had a missing verb. Very deterministic error. No, did not. Explain the difference between A and B in both, as in both the cases, a dependent clause followed by an independent clause. Again, are these people focusing on the meaning or visualizing the meaning? What's a deterministic error? Subject verb errors are deterministic. Verb tenses are deterministic. Verb tenses where they add to the meaning. Um, Pronoun illogical or incorrect for pronoun references are deterministic. Again, so core error types, when they add to the meaning, they're deterministic. Okay, let's kind of look at this. In options A and C, why aren't we canceling out although they appear to check if statement makes sense as it is a modifier, like we cancel out modifier grown? Again, when you read these articles on economists, when you read a piece of text, do you really say, do you cancel out certain terms and then visualize its meaning? No, you don't. Um, and you shouldn't do it for GMAT sentence correction either. Okay. What are the skills that you need to build? You know, you want to understand what is it that the author wants to communicate, and while communicating this, what deterministic errors exist. Okay. Two very different 700 level questions, but essentially they test very similar skills. So now I want to ask this one question over here because we're talking about grammar. What's the role of grammar? Why does grammar exist? Why does grammar exist? To convey the meaning accurately. Yes. The whole point of grammar is meaning. And essentially, if you understand this, you would first focus on meaning and then worry about grammar. And then and not worry about those archaic rules that exist with regards to grammar. The problem really is we think of grammar as a rule book that rules over meaning. And when we start doing that, that's when we start making mistakes. Okay. The reason why subject verb as a rule, I'm going to actually just delete this over here, exists is so that you can communicate the meaning correctly. Let's look at this sentence. Hold on. He run. Now, when you think about it, this is wrong. Okay. This sentence is wrong. What should be the correct sentence? They run or he runs. Which one is correct? Or you can say, I can't determine. Both are correct, right? So, why does subject verb agreement exist? Because when you have subject and verb, which that both agree in number, you have something which we call as double confirmation. They run confirms that we are talking about a group of people who run. He runs confirms that we have a singular entity who's running, right? So the whole purpose of subject verb, even the most basic rule in grammar, is to ensure that the meaning's clear. Because without subject verb agreement, you don't know what we want to communicate. Both are equally valid options. Again, the point being, don't think of grammar as an entity existing or a rule book that exists in isolation. Understand why grammar exists. Does that make sense? Okay. And again, the core piece with regards to understanding grammatical errors is to build sentence structure. If you're not able to build sentence structure, when it comes to complex structures, you're going to be hard pressed to identify errors and identify deterministic errors. If you don't do sentence structure, you're going to be hard pressed to visualize this meaning. If you don't do one or two, you're going to be hard pressed to achieve this. You're going to be hard pressed to reduce back and forth. You're going to be hard pressed to reduce your time to answer questions. So again, focus on this and and this is and this part will happen automatically. There's a book which, for prospective MBAs, I highly recommend it. It's a book called Thinking Backwards. It's a book that talks about how Amazon works. And one of the things that they talk about in that book is that when they think about growth, they think about input variables to the system. They don't worry about profits. They don't worry about sales growth. But what they really look at are the levers that drive these things, which are their input variables. And they say, as long as, in their experience, as long as the input variables are going in the right direction, the output variables automatically follow. Okay. Um, who is the author of that book? Good question. Let me tell you, I have it with me in my drawer here. This is by Colin Bayar, and I think it was Bill Carr. Those guys. These were two people who worked for Bezos um, at Amazon. Working backwards. I'm sorry, not thinking. Working backwards. Sorry about that, but yes, absolutely fabulous book. So my point being, focus on the input variables. You focus on building these skills. Your ability is going to be there. Thank you for correcting me. For the person who corrected me, have you read this book? Okay, halfway through. I'm about halfway through as well. I'm at the innovation part of it. I've read the first part twice. Okay, so where do you master sentence structure? One of the most important areas where you master sentence structure is the master comprehension course. Here we talk about building blocks of a sentence, uh, as well as pause points. Really, really important aspects. How many of you have gone through the master comprehension course over here? I saw many of you were e-GMAT students. And Abhishek, if you can type the name of the book, that would be great. The book's called Working Backwards. If you search on Amazon, this probably would be the only book. It's Colin Breyer and Bill. Let me just make sure. Yeah, you've gone through the master comprehension course. Now, fairly comprehensive course. It has about 12 learning activities and about 50 odd examples through which we start your sentence structure journey. And I'm going to just briefly dive into building blocks of a sentence. And let's just make sure we focus on this part over here. So we start with the simplest of sentences over here. You can see John cooks meals. Then we expand that. You can see it goes from John cooks meals to John, an aspiring chef, cooks delicious meals. The goal over here is to tell you how do we build complex sentences, and that's something that's really important. Thank you, Abhishek. And from here, and when you know how complex sentences are built, you obviously get to know how to read complex sentences. John, an aspiring chef, cooks delicious meals by using very basic ingredients. We then go on to really say, how do you kind of create compound sentences by combining multiple sentences? And this is again something you can see that's done over here. If you read the first two parts, this is sentence one over here. Let me just go and annotate it. This is sentence one, this is sentence two, and then we actually show how they are combined over here and here. You can see in this case, no fill. This is the combined output that we teach. Again, really important for you to know how this is done. Why? Because once you know how complex sentences are built, you're able to figure out where to pause, how to build that sentence structure also. Okay. So when you go through this, look at, and it may seem really simple, but look at how we've gone from a two-word sentence. Actually, we only showed a three-word. We started with a three-word. We actually start with a two-word sentence. Why? Because a basic sentence should have a subject and a verb. Doesn't even need an object. And to a 25 word sentence. Okay. Then, once you know how to build a sentence, we focus on pause points, which is where should you pause while reading. Why? Because it's really important to understand where you pause. Because once you understand pause points, you're able to do that sentence structure really well. And then recently, we added a new skill building module, which is how do you combine building blocks of a sentence and pause points to understand the meaning of complex sentences over here. Okay. Then this is the foundation. This is even before you go into the sentence structure course. This is something that we say you should know as a precursor to the sentence correction course. Then you go to the sentence correction course. There you learn sentence structure in about 33 learning activities, which are all our application and practice quizzes, which have about 140 odd examples. This is before you go into Scholarium. Remember, these activities do not teach any concepts. They simply teach you how to apply those concepts. This is an example of of a solution in the application file. Again, you can see the sentence structure over here. Sorry about that. You can see the sentence structure over here. You can see the takeaways. You can see how you should be reading it so that you isolate the errors in this case. And then you practice this, apply these skills in Scholarium, where you have about 450 odd full length questions, which were created by e-GMAT. That's twice as many questions as you would get in the official guide or so. So again, how do you master sentence structure? Start with MC, master comprehension, then continue building your skill in the application and practice quizzes, and then prove to us that you build that skill in Scholarium. Again, it's designed to make sure that you go from 0 to that 90th percentile. Okay. For those of you who want to learn what this course skill focused approach is, we've created this entire article or what I call learning activity, which talks about what this approach is and how is this approach to learning very different from what we call as the practice focused approach. In the core skill focused approach, we have specific learning activities to build each core skill. We give you feedback on whether you've actually built that core skill or not, which is where the trackability and feedback comes in. And then we kind of slowly increase the difficulty and while giving you feedback. So you exactly know where you're faltering, which aspects do you need to revise. If you want to really see this, click on this part over here, and it'll launch a learning activity, which will talk about what this approach is. Okay. With that, let's go to the third question for the day. Let me just go in and bring in our poll here. You guys know what to do. I need about 30 people to say still solving before I show the question. 29, let's get a couple of more folks to say still solving. All right, here is the question. Good luck, guys. All right, about 80% of the class is done. Let's get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll and broadcast the results. So this is how you guys did. We got about 50 odd answers over here. And you can see choices A and B are both really popular. Choices C and D are somewhat popular, and practically no one chose choice E. Well, not practically. In reality, no one chose choice C. So this is a complex question, a question where there's a lot of visualization that goes in. Uh, and let me. How many of you, when you saw this question and says, "Man, this is really difficult. There's a lot going on in this question." How many of you felt that that was the case? There's a lot going on. This is very, very difficult. Moderately difficult. This is actually an uber difficult question as per stats. Okay, again, I would only go as per stats because that's the best way to figure out the difficulty of this question. So let's kind of visualize choice A, what's going on. Now I want you to focus on the highlighted portions over here. Okay. So about 5 million acres in the US have been invaded by leafy spurge. What is leafy spurge? A herbaceous plant um, from Eurasia with milky sap that gives mouth sores to cattle, displacing grasses and other cattle food and rendering rangeland worthless. Okay, so pause at the areas where there's transition, because those are specific segments, and if you visualize those segments and connect them, you'd be able to figure out what is it that the author intends to communicate through those. So let's kind of look at this. What is leafy spurge? It is essentially this plant from Eurasia. What has milky sap? It's very clear. It's leafy spurge. Okay, what gives mouth sore to cattle? The milky sap gives mouth sore to cattle. So let's kind of look at the sequence of events, and the way you're doing it and the way I'm doing it could be slightly different, but not very. So essentially, cattle leave LS, and as they eat LS, the milky sap in LS gives mouth sores to cattle. So how does so that's something that's pretty clear. You know how cattle get mouth sores. That's really very clear. But how does rangeland become worthless? Let's kind of visualize that aspect of it. So leafy spurge comes in and it displaces grasses, because of which cattle end up eating leafy spurge. This leafy spurge has mouth sores. Cattle get those mouth sores, then cattle reduce. They don't eat them. No one wants to eat something that gives them mouth sores, because cattle don't eat leafy spurge. That renders the rangeland worthless. Fairly sophisticated visualization. How many of you were able to do this aspect with regards to rendering rangeland worthless? How many of you were able to visualize this entire sequence of events? That's good. If you were able to do that, that's great. If you weren't able to do that, figure out which aspect did you miss out on, so that you can learn from this. As I said, this is a place where you come in and where you learn. Okay. So as I said, as we saw, choices A and B were really popular, C and D moderately popular. So we're going to focus on these choices overall. So what's the problem with choice A? Choice A is wrong. A lot of you chose choice A. Let's focus on this part. A herbaceous plant from Eurasia containing milky sap that gives mouth sores to cattle. The outcome of that mouth sores is displacing grasses and rendering rangeland worthless. Okay. When it comes to displacing, uh, uh, does that make sense? Does that make sense for people who chose choice A? By giving mouth source to cattle, would you be displacing grasses? Is this an outcome of mouth source to cattle? Verb ing modifier? No. So even though grammatically it seems correct, does that logically make sense? No, right? For the person who's confused, can you please put that question in the Q&A pod? That way, Abhishek can can essentially answer this. The other piece is displacing grasses is an action, and rendering rangeland worthless is an outcome. Are they logically parallel? No, they're not logically parallel. That's another reason why choice A is incorrect. People who chose choice A, is that clear as to why choice A is incorrect? Why? Because the verb ing modifier over here is supposed to present the outcome of the preceding clause. And logically, the content of this does not present the outcome of the preceding clause. Okay. Choice B is correct. Choice B makes it correct. It says about 5 million. Let me actually clear something from my screen, hide palette. About 5 million acres in the US have been invaded by leafy spurge. What is leafy spurge? A herbaceous plant from Eurasia that gives, I'm going to ignore this part, that gives mouth sores to cattle. And that plant displaces grasses and other cattle food. And the outcome of all of this is that it renders rangeland worthless. Okay. Rendering is absolutely modifying the verb ing modifier over here is absolutely correct. Why? Because this is an outcome of displacing grasses and giving mouth sore to cattle. Okay, choice B absolutely correct. Doubts on choice B. There are actually a couple of doubts that people have on choice B. We're gonna that I usually see on choice B that I'm gonna address slightly later. So hold on to those choices. Let's look at choice C. Milky sap is basically additional info. Yes. What is the problem with choice C? And displacing. It's not parallel to that case. With having milky sap that gives mouth sore to cattle, having milky sap that displacing grasses, not parallel. Okay. Displacing and that gives not grammatically parallel over here. That, yeah. If it were displaces, would it be correct? Even if this were displaces, would it be correct? Yes or no? Why not? Grammatically, yes, it would be parallel. Why would it not be correct? The reason why it won't be correct is because giving mouth sores to cattle, does milky sap displace grasses? Does milky sap displace grasses or does the plant displace grasses? The plant displaces grasses, right? The milky sap doesn't. Is that clear to those who said if displacing were replaced by displaces? Again, visualize the meaning, not just of the original sentence, but also of every answer choice. Okay. Let's look at choice D. About 5 million acres in the US having invaded by leafy spurge, a herbaceous plant from Eurasia with blah blah blah, displaces grasses. Who is doing the action of displacing over here in this sentence structure? It's the 5 million acres. Is that logical? No. Yes, it's LOL. Yes. And that's the beauty of sentence structure. Okay. No one chose choice E, so I'm not going to worry about it. Again, if you go look at this question on GMAT Club, you're going to see a few things over here. You know, there are about 6 pages of discussion on this. It's 85% hard. It's one of the hardest questions, official questions here. Again, but 12,000 sessions on this, which is when we took the screenshot. Right now, I think we've gone on to that 7th page of discussion, or about 200 odd discussions on this. Okay. Someone talked about a positive. Again, I don't even know what that word means. I don't care. Why? Because as long it doesn't help me understand the meaning. So the sentence after removing the above a positive was correct. About 5 million acres in the US have been invaded by leafy spurge, displacing grasses and other cattle food, and rendering rangeland worthless. Okay. Now, how that has happened, no one's worried about this. Again, you can't remove certain parts of the sentence. Those parts, the reason why the author has put in is because they provide critical information that the author intends to communicate. Here's something that people really say. It seems that in choice A, the milky sap is the one that's causing mouth sores, but in choice B, the meaning changes it to the plant that's causing mouth sores. Absolutely correct. But even when the milky sap causes mouth sores, it's the plant that has the milky sap. Okay. So does that really change the meaning? This person is thinking in the right direction. Good question. But essentially, um, the person failed to make that connection that the plant has the milky sap. The plant contains the milky sap. Okay. So our objective at the start of the session, we want to make sure that you get the tools that you need to answer questions with high accuracy, and you do that quickly. How can you, what do you think you need to do this to achieve both these objectives? These are your output variables. What should be your input variables so that you achieve these output variables? What skills do you need to build to achieve these output variables? Visualization. Really important skill. Visualize whatever you're reading. And when you visualize, you'd be able to understand the meaning. The second skill is the skill of sentence structure. Very, really important. Okay. The other piece that I want to make sure you do that is don't limit visualization just to the original choice. Start with there, but make sure you carry that on to answer choices as well. Why? Because in the end, you're choosing an answer choice. In the end, when you choose an answer choice, you're making that claim that this answer choice communicates the same meaning as that choice A did, which means that if that in some ways, if you don't visualize it, then you can't certify if it actually does that. So visualize answer choices as well. Okay. Now, visualization is a skill. You need to build that skill, and any skill building requires you to put in deliberate effort. When you put in deliberate effort, it usually results in you taking longer to answer questions initially. And that's something that you have to understand. The moment you start visualizing information, your time to answer questions will go up. It'll go up for the next 20 questions, 20 to 25 questions, but only for that time. Your accuracy will improve, your time will increase. Don't worry about it if your time increases. Why? Because that's when you're building that visualization muscle. You have to go slow. If you don't go slow, if you're not deliberate, you're not going to be able to build that muscle. If you give up on visualization because you're taking longer, you will not be able to improve beyond a point. That's something that I can say with 100% certainty. How many of you, I know many of you e-GMAT students, while going through the course, realized that you were taking longer and gave up on visualization and understanding the meaning? Did anyone do that? Okay, don't do it. When you're learning a skill and you're learning any skill, go back 4 years, 5 years, when you were learning anything, you did take longer to begin with. I kind of, my favorite example is when people learn how to drive. When they learn how to drive, in the first during the first 5 or 6 days, you're hyper alert. You think everything. When you're changing gears, when you're making a turn, you look in every direction. You're actually the person who's slowing everyone down. If you remember when you learned how to drive, isn't that correct? You pretty much slowed everyone down. But then once you followed that deliberate approach for about a week to 10 days, um, you know, your 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 eyes automatically told your brain when someone was coming through. You only slowed down when you needed to, but not always. And that's where you need to be deliberate. If you play sports, how many of you play sports here? Whether it's badminton, racquetball, squash, cricket, soccer, in any sport, and racket sports more specifically, but rather in any sport, when you're learning a new shot, what's the most important thing that you need to do? You've got to get your technique right, and to get your technique right, you've got to slow down more often than not. Yes, Clash of Clans, probably. I mean, I don't play video games, so I can't really say what you do in video games, but I do play a lot of sports. But essentially, in I play squash, and I remember when I was learning, the boast and a few other shots, I did have to slow down. I had to be very very deliberate about my foot movement, my hand and body coordination, and only then did I get the shots right. Has anyone experienced that? Learning something new in sports? The same thing applies to learning a new skill. If you're not slowing down, if you don't have to slow down to learn a new skill, then you probably are not learning in the first place. The whole concept of learning requires you to slow down. Why? Because you have to go from that deliberate part of your brain to the subconscious part of it. And when you when you go from the deliberate to that subconscious, that's when timing falls in place. Okay. The other piece that I want to tell you is that accuracy and timing improve together. Here's a statistic from one of our students who scored 99 percentile. What you see over here, this we're talking about hard questions. We're talking about just hard questions and modifiers, and you can see his accuracy went from 58% to 84%. His time to answer questions went down, and this is a screenshot from Scholarium. You can track this data for yourself. Okay. Here's another guy who actually went to Columbia. He says, when I was solving questions after going through the course, he was able to identify multiple errors in difficult questions. This guy gave the GMAT twice before coming to e-GMAT. He was never able to get to a score higher than V34. With e-GMAT, I believe he was able to get to V40 or a V41 or so. So how will you achieve these two outputs? Let's kind of look at this over here. When you're going through, these are the skills that you need to build. Start with visualization, then do sentence structure, then do solid grammar. Okay. Now, throughout this point, you've got to look at data, you've got to learn from feedback. The example of a student over here, I've not been able to clear hard cementing because I missed the last questions. Any suggestions for me? Again, can't tell you right now because I haven't looked at data, but if you write to a support team, they'll be able to tell you where you're faltering, why you're faltering. Remember, to clear hard cementing, you only need to be able to answer half the questions correct. You're not looking at 70-75% accuracy, you're looking at 55% accuracy over there. Okay. But again, if you write to the support team, they'll tell you where you're faltering, how should you build your error log, send them your error log as well. And that will give them a lot more insight. Okay. Now, as you go through that master comprehension course, the thing that's really important is focus on building that visualization muscle. Use it, use those visualization skills on in everything, every piece of text that you read, and but don't worry about timing. That's really important. Okay. Um, as you go through the meaning module, the new module that's there, again, focus on building this. do not worry about timing at that point as well. If you focus on timing at that point, you're going to rush through things, and as you rush through things, you're not going to be able to build that visualization muscle over there. Okay. As you go through the SC course, which is where you're learning the core concepts and you're learning how to apply this, that's where you are taking that visualization muscle to that next level. You learn all the grammar that you need. Beyond this, you will not need any grammar. Okay, again, your timing should start to come in place, but I don't want you to focus on timing. Let this be a natural process. Okay. The thing that I want you to focus on at this point is to make sure that you achieve 80% accuracy or higher on each of these. Each of these learning activities um, is tracked. There's a post-assessment quiz at the end of it. You get feedback that's personalized to you. If you don't score high, such as what's the case with this, make sure you revise. And we track when you revise how much time you spend revising. For example, this guy scored a 67% over here. He revised the solutions right after the quiz ended. He spent about 2.5 minutes revising, which I think is a pretty decent time. But the very fact that this person revised right after taking the quiz is really good. Why? Because you make the mistakes, you make your notes over there, and then as you go forward, you don't make mistakes. How many of you do this revision right after you finish a quiz? Okay, really good. How many of you make notes? If you don't do it, start doing it. And I can tell you, we track this. There's a reason we built the technology to track this. There's a reason we built this technology over here. Because this, for us, is a really critical winning behavior. And it's those behaviors combined with the right processes that help you get to those high scores. Okay. As you go towards Scholaranium, understand what you should be revising. This again is a screenshot of Scholaranium result screen. What you see is, how long have you taken to solve this question? What's the median time to solve this question correctly? We also show this chart over here. And it's really important to look at this chart because, hey, if you're taking longer, which is the case over here, then there was something about that question that stumped you. So even though you may have gotten this question right, if you've taken longer and significantly longer, then you should spend time on revising, spend time revising the solution so that you know why you took longer and so that you don't repeat that. Okay. And don't ignore questions where you took longer. So this is something that most people do. Questions that they solve incorrectly, most people actually do revise them. But over here, such questions, people don't revise them. One of the most critical modules is the error log module in the SC course or in any course over here. Make sure you go through this module not once but twice. The more you understand how to build the behavioral error log that we ask you to build, the faster you will improve, because the e-GMAT format of error log, it actually defines why you make mistakes. And once you know why you make mistakes, correcting those mistakes is fairly simple. Okay. Again, go through the sequence. Following the sequence is really important. A lot of people start with the master comprehension course. They skip the sentence correction course because they really want to practice questions in Scholaranium. They've heard a lot about Scholaranium and people really rave about it. And that's why they say, let me just get to Scholaranium, solve questions because I think I'm going to learn from there. Don't do that. Follow the process. Only then you'd be able to get to that 90th percentile ability or so. Okay. When you are in Scholaranium, there is a certain sequence that you have to follow as well. You have to first do the cementing quizzes, then identify, even when you hit the threshold, you still may have specific weaknesses. Identify those weaknesses and then fix those weaknesses. I'm going to show you how to do this. There's a set of tools that we give you in Scholaranium, starting with that error log, starting with the cementing quizzes, the revision list that our AI generates, and then the improvement tracker, and then the consistency tracker. I'm going to show each one of these to you. Here's a trend for cementing quizzes. The first quiz in any subsection in Scholaranium needs to be a cementing quiz. In each subsection, we give you, you're only required to do 3 cementing quizzes. You're only required to cross your threshold in 3 cementing quizzes, but we know that you're not going to do that in the first go, um, which is why we give you up to 9 or 10 cementing quizzes in every subsection. When you falter, go back to your error log, because that's when you would improve. Remember, what is cementing? How many of you study a subsection and then go from, let's say, SC to RC and forget SC? How many of you have experienced that? Or you go from number properties to algebra and forget number properties? Cementing is an e-GMAT process that ensures that that doesn't happen. When you study, when you go through the e-GMAT SC course, you see about 300 to 400 examples. You solve about 200 questions. That gives you that foundation. Think of that as while you're building a wall, you're stacking bricks one on top of the other. Cementing ensures that those bricks have support. So you come to Scholarium, you start the cementing process, and we have very specific cementing quizzes. So you first do medium cementing. You have a threshold which is 70% that you have to hit. You can see that threshold over here. Then you do this is medium cementing. Then you do hard cementing, and when you hit that threshold, that's when we know you've cemented the concepts. You're not going to forget those. Okay. Now, as you go through any quiz in Scholarium, we tell you if your score is impacted by timing, if you were lucky with certain questions, if you made mistakes because you didn't spend enough time, which is what we call as the rush through factor. As an example of a review list where, here's a question that you answered correctly, but you took a lot longer than what it should be. And we recommend that you review this, and you can really see why you should review this. It says excessive timing. Every question that you took longer than the median time that you should have taken, we mark that. Why is that important? What do you infer from this screen for this particular student? What's the one inference that you can get out of it, other than the fact that this guy made 5 mistakes? What else can you infer from here? Not following the smart process to do it faster. Okay, that's good. That's there. Spend excessive time. He needs to improve on visualization. Okay, good. Yes, those are skills that definitely are there, and that's something that he needs to do. But one of the other things that you would see right away is, in every question that, or in most questions that he's answered incorrectly, he spent an excessive amount of time, which means this person does not let go. Correct? If the guy took 2 minutes and 7 seconds on a question that most people get right in 57 seconds, then this person does not let go. Similarly, the recommended time, people who get it right, the median time to get it right is 1:06, and this guy took 2:10. This person does not let go. Would you agree? And those are skills that you've got to build when you get to that cementing and post cementing stage, not while you're doing the course, but when you get to that cementing and post cementing stage. And if you are in that stage, if you write to our strategy team, they are all skilled to look at this data and draw such inferences from that data and give you recommendations. Okay, now how do you isolate relative weakness? This is again a very sophisticated charge. You are in the sentence correction course. We are looking at block level accuracy. We're looking at medium difficulty questions. And what you see over here is that this person has issues with subject verb pronouns. Is okay with modifiers. He's okay with parallelism comparison, but is not as good with SV verbs and pronouns, and tenses or so. By focusing on his energy on these areas, this person was able to improve his accuracy while reducing his time to answer questions. Okay. Again, You do this iterative process, you first isolate your weakness, then go and improve on it. After you've cemented, that's when you get to that 70, from that 70th, 80th percentile ability to that 90th, 95th percentile ability. That's when you get into that 730, 740 bracket or so. Okay. Again, it's really important to do these things in steps, because that when you do them in steps, you ensure that you're building on that foundation, you're enhancing on that foundation, and you ensure that you're not on shaky grounds overall. Okay. So for those of you who are not students, check out the free trial, see if this is a learning style that suits you. We have a lot of content in our free trial, in SCC, RRC, number properties, algebra, geometry, word problems or so. Okay. All right. With that, if you have any questions, let me know. I'll be happy to address those questions. Let me share the session PDF as well. When is the next free class? It's tomorrow. It's on algebra. Let me share that as well. So here's the list of upcoming sessions. How do you become a student? You know, Usually most people buy the course from our website, and then we have onboarding sessions that we host every week. They attend an onboarding session, um, so that they get to know the team, they get to know our strategy experts. But essentially, when you purchase, the onboarding happens automatically as well. So you don't have to wait for for our onboarding sessions to happen. So you start with building your study plan. Uh, and to do that, you first take a Sigma X mock, then put that in our personalized study planner tool. You get a study plan. It tells you the sequence of studying, and then you go from there. You're not able to click on links. All right, let me just share the link over here. One second. Here is the link to the algebra webinar, and tomorrow we'll share the link to the strategy session. All right. Chris has a question. Do we need more practice beyond Scholarinium on the e-GMAT platform? Is it sufficient for 760 scorers? Most people don't. I mean, the only thing that we ask you to do in addition to what we have on in Scholarinium is to practice hard questions from any official guide 2020 onwards. Okay. But what's important is that you hit the metrics in Scholarinium. As long as you hit the metrics in Scholarinium, you will do really well on the GMAT. Okay, I have another question where someone's saying, "Can I show the error log?" The error log is a fairly sophisticated affair. Um, so unfortunately, I won't be able to show the error log. But if you write to us, we'll be happy to share an error log session that we did, and it takes about a couple of hours to do this. That's which is why error log by itself is a module. Okay, Chris, take a look at this debrief. This is a student who went to who scored 770, got a V47. You can see how he went about this. Okay. All right, guys, with that, I want to thank everyone for joining me today. For those of you who were asking for the study plan links and SigmaX mock links, these links are over here. The first link is to get a study plan. The second is for a SigmaX mock. And for those of you who are not connected with me on LinkedIn, you can click on the third link, connect with me on LinkedIn. All right. With that, I want to thank you for joining me today. It was truly a pleasure having you guys. and I'll see you on egmat.com. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.